Only two things here are Game Boys, and you've probably assumed that already. Recently, there has been a huge influx of clamshell handhelds like these in my collection, and I felt like it'd be kind of cool to talk about these. I get a lot of questions about them anyway. I also got a new one a few days ago, so it's kind of fresh in my mind, you know? Let's begin with this chunky boy. I get a lot of questions about this. I don't believe it's charged. This is the Amberick 406V, I believe. It's been in my collection for a minute. It runs Android, which is really cool. And it can emulate up to GameCube and PS2, and it does a pretty good job. I don't use it as much as I would like to. I mean, videos I've made on it on TikTok have gotten a little bit of traction, which is why I get so many questions about it. But most of the handhelds you're about to see that aren't Game Boys are from Amberick. If you don't know anything about Amberick, they make emulation handhelds, really. They look very similar to other handhelds. Most of them do anyway. And they can emulate games. It's pretty simple, but the more you know, right? I don't believe this has any battery left in it. I gave it little thumb grips because the sticks are actually like switch sticks, which is pretty cool. The other more Game Boy-like thing is the Miyu Mini Plus. This one's also super cute. I don't know if it has battery. Oh, it does. This is my only Miyu device. Miyu also makes emulation handhelds, and this one might be my favorite of the vertical handhelds. It has a little Nier Automata theme, which I think is really cute. But I think this is definitely one of my favorites. I would play Pico 8 games on this one all the time. This one for a while became my device to play Pico 8 games. It also updates through Wi-Fi, which I think is really cool because a lot of the Amberick devices that don't run Android, you have to update it yourself, and it's kind of a hassle. So this has been like the most convenient little one for me. A lot of the emulation handhelds kind of have a very similar, like, it shows every console that you can run, and then you can just run games on them. You can throw your own little game ROMs and stuff here. Most of the time for stuff like these, I like to run Game Boy Advance games. I think they're the most fitting, especially with the form factor. On bigger ones like this, and I also plan to get the Amberick one that just came out that looks like a PSP Go. Stuff like those, like, I like running GameCube on because it's fun to have a GameCube game that I can throw in my bag. But anyway, I think this one is definitely one of my favorites, but I throw like all of my Pico 8 games on here and I play these like crazy. I opened a game and it already had my save from whenever I was last playing it, which is crazy because I haven't turned this thing on in a long time, and it still had a full charge. Oh, look at that. You can just take the back out. That's cool. The thing I also really like about this, because it can connect to Wi-Fi, it can run the Pico 8 app that like resets the games every other week, I believe. It's been a while since I've consumed anything Pico 8, but there's like a featured tab that always updates with new Pico 8 games. I think that's really cool. Pico 8 is like a whole rabbit hole that I do not want to get into right now. But if you don't know anything about Pico 8, you should totally check it out. I think it's really cool, especially if you have little handhelds like this, but whatever. Let's get into the weirder stuff though. This thing is clearly not a Game Boy. The ones like these are the main reason that I am making this video, because these are identical in size. I'll unplug it, but they're like the exact same dimensions and they feel the same. I think the Amberick is slightly heavier because of the rechargeable battery, I assume, but there's barely a difference. I bought this day one when Amberick released it. I absolutely love that the X and Y buttons are transparent, so like from a distance you can sort of tell, but you can't really see the extra buttons. This one can run up to PSP games. I posted a video when I got this of me playing Project Evo on this thing, and it confused a couple people because it just looks so similar to a regular Game Boy Advance. It's amazing. It's like a really weird alternative to if you want a modded Game Boy Advance with the IPS screen, but you don't have like the physical games for it. It's kind of in that middle ground to me. But weirdly enough, I often see Amberick devices promoted on TikTok for people who don't really play video games, which I think is a really interesting approach. I saw someone actually promoting this one this morning on TikTok, and they were like, guys, I just bought this little weird console thingy and I can play all of the games that I used to like when I was little. I haven't even thought about video games in so long, but this thing just sparked that nostalgia. And in my head, I'm like, oh, that is a really interesting approach for these handhelds, because I feel like the demographic for emulation handhelds isn't really people who don't play video games? It's like a whole other niche space within the handheld space. It's like for people who buy these because a new one releases like every other week. And sometimes there are just really unique ones that come out and then people just throw all their games on here. They mess with it for like a couple weeks. They're obsessed with it. And then a new one comes out and then you cycle it out. Or even a really cool one comes out and then you stick with it for a long time because it's just cool and you can throw all your games on there, you know what I mean? I've noticed that the demographic for handhelds like these are usually people who are really into retro gaming and they are really into emulation, but they want it to be on physical hardware instead of it being like on a computer screen. And because so many of these retro handheld brands make them look so nostalgic, it just sort of adds to that. So like these, like obviously I want to play Game Boy Advance games on them because of the form factor. Or then when it's something cool like the Miyu Mini, like I can just play a bunch of extra stuff on here. It's just a really different vibe on YouTube and then on TikTok. I think that idea is also further emphasized because a lot of people who promote Amberick or just any emulation devices on TikTok are usually making that TikTok shop commission off of it. I'll admit, I've promoted this one on TikTok shop a lot because I was sent it by Amberick, or at least a store that distributes Amberick devices. And I played a lot of Mario Kart Wii on this thing. I've made some commission off of this device specifically. And I think that's kind of why there's so many videos on TikTok of people who were just probably sent this and they were like, well, I'm not super into video games, but I do want that sweet commission money. So I'm gonna attempt to sell this to people. At least that's what I've seen. But then I go on YouTube and then there's a lot of people who do dedicate their channels to reviewing these. And I watch those channels like crazy. So maybe that's why I notice a huge difference. Anyway, where the heck was I? This device that died on me, so I had to plug it back in. I mostly play Game Boy Advance games on it. Obviously, it's the form factor, like how can I not? And they look really good on it. Like I can, if this has some charge in it, I will compare it right now. I also threw Good Boy Galaxy on here when I got this device. This is a game that released a few years ago, I think. It is a modern Game Boy Advance game and it is really good, but clearly the screen is really good. And it low-key, again, kind of competes with an IPS screen on a Game Boy. It is definitely just whether you want like the nostalgic form factor or if you want to play your physical games and also just have an actual Game Boy Advance. I really like both of these options, honestly. Let's do Alien Hominid. I feel like I always put F-Zero as a comparison, which I can do too. Again, it's just a really weird difference, especially with the Amberick device's screen being bigger, not having all of this bezel space, but at the same time, the bezel is also nostalgic. So it's really odd, I guess. I think the viewing angles are pretty good on both devices as well. I don't think the camera will really pick it up that well, but my IPS screen on the Game Boy sort of has like a scan line effect. I think it will just show like exaggerated lines on the camera, but it's there. And I think it kind of makes the pixels pop a little bit more because on this screen it is obviously very sharp pixel art, but I think this one kind of makes the pixels pop just slightly more. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But on to these ones. This is a real Game Boy Advance. However, the battery has been kind of acting up, which is really unfortunate because I just bought this. The seller told me that the battery was new, and after doing some research online, a lot of people say that you kind of have to jumpstart the battery a bit by just plugging it, unplugging it over and over again until it just charges. But I did that for maybe like 10 minutes and it still would not charge. So if you do have any tips, that would be really cool because I believe this also has a modded IPS screen on it. But the reason I have this here is because of these three right here. This is a game box. At some point in time, these were pretty popular SP clones. I found this on AliExpress for like $40, maybe $50 way back when I got this. And it is almost a one-to-one with a regular Game Boy Advance SP. They have pretty much the exact same dimensions and very identical everything. But the one thing that just ever so slightly drags the game box down is the screen is slightly longer. It's slightly stretched. I don't know if you can really tell, but the bezels are like more like this. So it can play actual cartridges, which is a really cool thing about it. Let's do Super Circuit. It feels cheap, but I don't really think that will show on camera, besides maybe the sound of it clicking. It also charges with a real Game Boy Advance port. And depending on how hard you look, it is ever so slightly discolored and the screen is stretched a little bit. And that doesn't really bother a lot of people, right? So a lot of people actually buy this as an alternative to just buying a regular one. It also doesn't sleep, I've noticed. But there was a point in time where I had this instead of a Game Boy Advance SP just because of the price difference. So it's a very weird alternative, but it kind of works. You can kind of see that it's a little bit longer and it's really weird. Besides the overall feeling being a little cheap, this is honestly kind of a really good alternative. Depending on how much you care on the picture quality of the actual games themselves. But the game box is definitely a thing of legend, in my opinion. It's a very weird device, and that's why it's in my collection. And now for these two. This is the Amberick RG34XX. And this is the RG35XX. What makes these two so different? Well, this one has sticks, and this one also has bezels. Hear me out. This one right here was like my ride or die for such a long time. This was my favorite Amberick device for so long. Like the second they announced this, I knew I was getting this day one. I have been waiting so long for an Amberick device that looks like an SP, and this is everything I ever wanted in an emulation handheld. It looks exactly like an SP, just upgraded to have more buttons. And it just works so well. Like the way that they added the second buttons, just throw it on there. USB-C, it even has HDMI out, and it just works so good. It's a little bit bigger than an SP, but that never bothered me. Just kind of thick. It's kind of chilling, but it never bothered me, really. It got all of these consoles, right? Typical Amberick stuff, but enough for me. Of course, I'd play a lot of Game Boy Advance on this thing. And what really, really sold me on this, because just like the game box, it has a pretty stretched out screen, mostly for 4x3 games. But when you boot up a Game Boy Advance game on this thing, it would throw on a bezel. Isn't that so cool? It also gives this faint shadow effect where if you do have an SP, right, there is that slight effect in there because that's just how the screen is. It's a little sunken in, but that makes it nostalgic, and this does it. I love the detail that went into SP emulation on this device. This whole bezel and shadow effect thing just really sold it for me. It makes the games pixel perfect. It doesn't stretch them out, and it sleeps. I believe it sleeps. Yeah, it sleeps. That's so cool. All of this and the bigger screen and the whole bezel thing, like look at that. I don't know if that's as impressive to you as it is to me, but I love it so much. It made this like the ultimate Game Boy Advance experience for me, and I could also play extra games on it. I'd play a lot of Crazy Taxi on here because the 4x3 screen just makes it look so good. And then there's this, which I didn't think I'd like at all because I love this one so much. The bezel and everything just is so good. I was like, why would I even want this one? But then I was sent this device the other day to make some videos on, and I actually fell in love with this. It's gonna take me a minute, right, to truly know if it is better than this one, but it's kind of close. I thought the joysticks were kind of ugly, and I didn't really like the GameCube color scheme until I saw this in person. But then I ran a Game Boy Advance game on this, and I realized this has a better screen. Now, I don't know how much I really prefer it over this whole like nostalgic bezel thing going on. A little closer in size to an actual SP. Now, the actual device is the exact same as an SP. Like, it is not bigger at all. This one is a little bit bigger. This is the exact dimensions as an SP, and it is very impressive how they were able to do it like this. But I also noticed how much more saturated games looked on this. Games look a lot sharper on this one. And it's really interesting to me how that is. And I know that there's also an overlay thing going on, but it's really interesting to me how different these feel. They both have pretty identical UIs as well. PS1 games are also a little interesting because the overlay that shows up automatically, if my camera could focus, that would be so cool. It shows a little glimpse of the PS1, and it just says PlayStation on the sides to keep the aspect ratio, which I think is pretty cool. Though because of the aspect ratio of this screen, it looks a little more natural on here. But this one has joysticks for these types of games. So it's definitely a weird decision to me that they decided to not just have this one be a rework of the older model and keep the 4x3 on this screen and then keep the Game Boy games with the cool little bezel. Besides all of this, these are definitely my favorite way to play Game Boy Advance games if I'm not going to use actual hardware. I love the form factor of this one. Oops, I did not mean to turn it off. I love the form factor of this one a lot more, but I love the visuals of this one a lot more. The silver one has one problem, and my one problem is that the buttons are so damn clicky in comparison to both the original and the new model. This is the purple model. Not that bad. And the SP, you can barely hear it. And then this one, okay. A little too clicky for me. A little too loud for me even, but that's okay because these are still really cool. PSP games also look really nice on here because of the aspect ratio. It's just a really weird nitpicky thing where one thing is better, but then the other one is better. With these emulation devices, there is never a perfect one. There will always be an iteration where things are improved, but then there are so many setbacks, and it is definitely just to keep people coming to buy stuff. However, I don't really think I have much else to say about all of my really weird not Game Boys in my collection. I think I'm gonna leave it here. So thank you for watching this video. If you were eating during this video, I hope your meal was good. If you were drawing, I hope your drawing turned out good. If you were doing chores, I hope you got your chores done. And I will see you next week to ramble about more stuff. Bye bye!